Welcome to a journey through time to March 1788, a pivotal moment when New Orleans stood at the crossroads of colonial destiny. A city where French culture thrived under Spanish rule, where the Mississippi River brought fortunes from across continents, and where, on one fateful Good Friday, flames would change everything forever. For centuries, these scenes have existed only as sketches and maps, fragments of a lost world. But today, thanks to advanced artificial intelligence, we can breathe life back into these historical images, transforming them into vivid, realistic scenes that transport us directly into the past. Our story begins on the mighty Mississippi River, the artery that gave New Orleans its purpose and power. This sweeping waterway, over half a mile wide at the city, carried the wealth of an entire continent. In 1788, the riverfront bustled with activity, unlike anywhere else in North America. Flatboats from Pennsylvania and Kentucky drifted downstream, loaded with flour, whiskey and salted pork. Ocean-going vessels from Havana, Veracruz and France anchored in the current, their holds filled with sugar, coffee and manufactured goods. Small pirogues, carved from single cypress logs by local habitants, darted between the larger vessels. The river was New Orleans' highway to the world. Founded by the French in 1718 as a strategic gateway to control the Mississippi Valley, by 1788 the city had become a crucial entrepot where goods from the continental interior met commerce from the Caribbean and Atlantic worlds. Though under Spanish rule since 1763, the city remained overwhelmingly French in language, culture and character. The population had grown to approximately 5,300 souls, a diverse mix of French Creoles, Spanish officials, enslaved Africans, free people of colour, and a handful of merchants from across the Atlantic world. Notice the levees lining the riverbank. These earthen barriers, constantly maintained and reinforced, were all that stood between the city and the river's seasonal floods. The French saying held true here: God created the world, but man created New Orleans. We arrive now at the Place d'Armes, the parade ground and civic heart of New Orleans. This open square facing the Mississippi served as military drill ground, public marketplace, and the stage for all significant events in colonial life. On the northwest side of the square stood the parish church of St. Bartholomew, a modest wooden structure with a simple bell tower. Built in the 1720s and expanded over the decades, this church served the spiritual needs of the entire colony. Next to it stood the Corps de Garde, the military guardhouse, and the first Cabildo building, a simple structure housing the Spanish municipal government. These buildings may appear humble, but they represented the dual authorities that governed colonial life. Church and state, working in tandem, controlled everything from baptismal records to commercial regulations. The Cabildo, established in 1769 when Spain took firm control of Louisiana, acted as both city council and court of justice. The square bustled perpetually. Market vendors spread their wares on the dusty ground. Fresh fish from Lake Pontchartrain, vegetables from upriver plantations, eggs and chickens from small farms. Spanish soldiers drilled in formation, their muskets gleaming in the subtropical sun. Priests in brown capuchin robes walked purposefully between the church and their residents. Enslaved workers carried goods from the riverfront warehouses. By 1788, New Orleans remained a city of wooden buildings, most constructed in the French colonial style, with steep pitched roofs, wide galleries, and walls of cypress timber set between posts. The humid climate rotted wood quickly, and fire was an ever-present danger, yet few imagined just how vulnerable the city truly was. From the Place d'Armes, we move down Chartres Street, one of the main commercial arteries running parallel to the river. Two-storey wooden buildings lined both sides, their ground floors serving as shops and warehouses, their upper floors providing living quarters for merchants and their families. Wide galleries with shingled roofs protected pedestrians from sun and rain. This was where business happened. Merchants negotiated prices for indigo from Louisiana plantations, deerskins from Choctaw traders, and tobacco from Natchez. Ships' captains sought cargoes for voyages to Havana or Bordeaux. Notaries drafted contracts in both French and Spanish, navigating the complex legal hybrid that governed Louisiana commerce. The street was barely more than a muddy track in wet weather, covered with cypress planks laid across the worst sections. Open gutters ran down the sides, carrying rainwater and waste toward the river. Pigs and chickens roamed freely, serving as the city's informal sanitation system. Yet for all its roughness, Chartres Street hummed with prosperity. Spanish trade reforms in the 1780s had opened New Orleans to commerce with France and the French West Indies. Ship traffic had increased dramatically, and merchants were making fortunes. At number 619 Chartres Street stood a comfortable two-storey house, the residence of Don Vicente José Núñez, the treasurer of the Spanish army in Louisiana. Nothing about this house suggested it would soon change the city's destiny forever. At the levee, the raised embankment where the city met the river, stevedores, many of them enslaved men, loaded and unloaded vessels. Hogsheads of sugar, barrels of flour from Pennsylvania, and bundles of deerskins awaited shipment to European markets. Warehouses lined the landward side, holding the city's wealth in vulnerable wooden buildings. By March 1788, New Orleans was experiencing an economic boom. Spanish Governor Esteban Miró had actively encouraged trade, and the results were visible everywhere. The number of ships visiting the port had doubled in just a few years. The city was expanding beyond its original boundaries. This prosperity came at a terrible cost. Approximately half of New Orleans' population consisted of enslaved Africans and African Americans, who performed the backbreaking work of loading ships, building levees, and maintaining the city's infrastructure. Under Spanish law, enslaved people had somewhat more legal protections than under French rule, but they remained property, their labour extracted by force. Now we come to the moment that would transform New Orleans forever. Good Friday, March 21st, 1788. The city's approximately 1,100 buildings, most of them wooden, stood baking under a warm spring sun. A strong wind blew from the southeast. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, a candle or votive light ignited curtains in the home of Don Vicente José Núñez on Chartres Street. Within minutes, the wooden structure was ablaze. The fire spread to adjacent buildings with terrifying speed. Normally, church bells would have been rung as a fire alarm, but this was Good Friday, the most solemn day in the Catholic calendar. The priests refused to allow the bells to be rung. By the time the alarm was finally raised, precious minutes had been lost. The strong southeast wind turned those minutes into catastrophe. Flames leaped from roof to roof, consuming the tinder-dry wooden buildings. The fire spread in all directions, creating a wall of flame that swept across the city's heart. Residents fled in panic, grabbing whatever possessions they could carry. Enslaved workers rushed to save their master's property, often at great risk to their own lives. The heat became so intense that buildings ignited before the flames even reached them. Governor Miró and Spanish soldiers attempted to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings in the fire's path, but the wind was too strong, the flames too fast. For 5 hours, New Orleans burned. Dawn on Holy Saturday, March 22nd, 1788, revealed utter devastation. Of the approximately 1,100 buildings in New Orleans, 856 had been destroyed, more than 3/4 of the entire city. The fire had consumed virtually everything in the city's core. The parish church of St. Louis, the Cabildo, the army barracks, the armory, the jail, all reduced to ashes. Most of the city's commercial buildings, warehouses, and homes were gone. Entire families wandered through the ruins, searching for any remnants of their former lives. Merchants whose fortunes had been in their warehouses found only smoking debris. Artisans whose tools had been their livelihood searched through ashes for scraps of metal. Yet remarkably, fewer than a dozen people perished in the flames, but thousands were homeless. Food supplies had been destroyed. The city's bakeries had all burned. Governor Miró moved with impressive speed. Within hours, Spanish soldiers were erecting tents to shelter the homeless. He commandeered ships to bring food from upriver plantations, froze prices to prevent profiteering, and dispatched vessels to Philadelphia to purchase essential supplies. More importantly, Miró understood that New Orleans could not simply be rebuilt as it had been. The fire had exposed the fundamental weakness of wooden construction. If the city were to have a future, it must be built differently. Within weeks, Reconstruction began. Spanish building codes required new structures to use fire-resistant materials. Wooden buildings must be covered with stucco. Roofs must be slate or tile, not wooden shingles. The architectural style began to shift. The new buildings featured Spanish colonial characteristics. Thick brick walls, interior courtyards, arcaded ground floors, wrought iron balconies. The French Quarter, paradoxically, began to look Spanish. Don Andres Almonesta, Iroxas, offered to rebuild the parish church at his own expense. His new St. Louis church, completed by 1794, would be far grander than its predecessor, becoming the cathedral when New Orleans was elevated to a diocese in 1793. By 1791, much of the city had been rebuilt with more substantial fire-resistant buildings. What had been an overgrown French village was becoming a proper Spanish colonial city, but the transformation was not complete. On December 8, 1794, another conflagration swept through New Orleans, destroying 212 more buildings. This second fire eliminated most of the remaining French-era structures. The fire of 1788 forced a reckoning. The wooden buildings and informal arrangements of the French period had to give way to something more substantial. Spanish administration brought architectural change, urban planning, building codes, and civic infrastructure. The fire that destroyed old New Orleans created the architectural legacy we admire today. The tragedy of Good Friday 1788 paradoxically preserved the city for future generations, replacing vulnerable wooden structures with lasting brick and stucco buildings that would survive hurricanes, floods, and the passage of time. If you enjoyed this journey through late colonial New Orleans, please let us know in the comments which city and era you'd like to see brought to life next through AI reconstruction. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.